Hey folks, quick heads up. This video is only a part of a comprehensive course on vueschool.io. Dive deeper and master advanced techniques by checking out the full course linked in the description below. Happy coding!
Forms play a major part in making complex and interactive web applications. From messaging a colleague to booking a flight to writing a blog post. None of these use cases, plus a whole host of others, would be possible without forms. On the surface, forms look pretty simple. After all, it's easy to slap an input on the page with type equals text, and then call it a day. But what about the label? And maybe some help text. Oh, and an invalid state? What about an invalid message that accurately describes the issue to the user and is located near the input it's describing? Now, just for a single field, we've got quite a few lines of markup. And I can only imagine all the manual and probably inconsistent JavaScript logic that we'd need to apply. What's more, forms are rarely single inputs, but usually consist of multiple inputs of varying types. And sometimes they're even grouped in different ways. Think we're about done? Not so fast. There's plenty more to consider, like styling, accessibility, submission states, field icons, reactive data, and more. So maybe it's not as easy as it first seems. The beauty of Vue.js is that we can encapsulate markup and functionality into a single component with a streamlined and convenient API. Then, we can use that same API to power all different types of form fields. This makes for less typing and really less thinking whenever you create a new field, and easier reading when you come back to the code later on. More importantly, it leads to a consistent interface that's maintainable over time. Perhaps best of all, this syntax you see now is not just an idea of what could be. It's actually a fully functional library of open source software, tailor-made for Vue.js 3. FormKit is a self-proclaimed framework that simplifies form structure, generation, validation, theming, submission, error handling, and more. I've used FormKit personally and its predecessor Vue Formulate on a number of different projects, and I quite enjoy how convenient it is to create dynamic forms. In this course, we'll take a look at how to create user-friendly forms with developer-friendly code. We'll render fields with a lean and consistent API. We'll provide timely validation with expressive messaging quickly and efficiently. We'll even briefly dabble with form generation from a JSON schema. All of this will be powered out of the box with FormKit, and for those use cases that aren't, we'll even discover how to extend FormKit with custom inputs and themes. So, if you're tired of building forms the hard way, then let's get started building the easy way with Vue.js and FormKit. Alright, in this lesson, let's start building forms with FormKit. But first, we need to have an environment to work in. I've started by creating a brand new Nuxt project. You can do the same on your local machine by typing npx nuxi init and then the name of the project. I called mine Robust Forms Course. If you'd rather follow along with an online playground, you could use something like StackBlitz in order to do it all in your browser. If you visit nuxt.new, then you're presented with this little page here, which shows you several different ways of getting started with Nuxt. By choosing the StackBlitz option here, you get the same exact project that I booted up locally, but inside of StackBlitz. So feel free to follow along this way as well. By the way, I've decided to start the project with Nuxt since its file structure is so minimal, and because we get a few niceties like auto import of the composition functions from Vue. However, if you'd like to use FormKit with a regular old Vue SPA, you could definitely do that as well. Alright, so first things first, let's now install FormKit. I'll do npm install at formkit/nuxt in order to install the FormKit module. If this was a plain Vue.js project, you'd use at formkit/vue instead. Once that finishes downloading, we can register the module over in our Nuxt config file. Now, since we're using Nuxt, we can create a formkit.config.ts file in our root directory. This is how we'll configure the default options for the module. Once again, if you are working in a vanilla Vue project, you could provide these same global configuration options when you use the plugin with app.use. For best TypeScript support, I'll import default config options from at formkit/vue. Then we'll define the configuration options using the default config options type. If you're not familiar with TypeScript, don't worry about it. All this is really doing is making sure that the object that we're providing here contains the proper options and the proper types of values. For example, if I did Control Spacebar, you'd see a list of all the available options. All those with underscores are meant to be private, so we'll skip over those. But all of these other things here are options that we could use to configure FormKit. The only one that I want to provide right now is the theme option. This tells FormKit how we want our form inputs to look. And the default theme provided by FormKit is called Genesis. Lastly, I'll just export this default config. At this point, we might have to restart the Nuxt dev server in order to pick up on this config file. And now we can start creating inputs with FormKit. We'll do that in the next lesson. Before we start creating our own inputs, let's quickly look at the FormKit docs in order to see what all's available. Under docs and then inputs here, you can see a wealth of options. We have an autocomplete, which is a pro input. So that's worth noting here that we do have a collection, a combination of pro and free inputs to use. So there's also a button, a checkbox, a color picker, and just a number of different things here. There's a text area, there's time, there's week. Yeah, there's really a lot to choose from. Okay, now let's go and get hands-on in the code. Let's open up app.vue, and I'll replace this Nuxt welcome component here with a brand new shiny FormKit component. Let's start out with a regular old text input. After I hit save, you'll notice my IDE automatically added the closing tag for me, and over on the left-hand side, we do have our input displayed to the page. Let me zoom in just a little bit so you can see things more clearly. Now, so far, what we've got really isn't that impressive, right? It's just a regular old text input. However, now we could create other kinds of inputs with the same exact API that typically require an entirely different tag. For instance, we could add in a select here. And how about a text area? Nice. Over on the left-hand side, you can see that we do in fact get the proper inputs. To make things even shorter, we can make these all self-closing component tags, like this. Yeah, that works just the same. Having this common API for all of our inputs makes it super easy to remember how to create the field markup. However, it also makes dynamically changing out the types of the fields a lot easier, since all you have to do is bind the type property. And sometimes a dynamic field type is a super useful feature. Let's up the game on our text input here, though, just a little bit by taking a look at some of the other prompts that we can provide. I've got that already copied to my clipboard, so I'll just paste that in. Immediately, you can see the output update here on the left. And now we have an input label, some help text, even a invalid message here. This is powered by the label prompt and the help prompt, as well as validation, but for some reason our icon is not showing up. Let's try to give the page a quick refresh. Nice, that's better. Now we have the icon present, and you'll notice we also have the value that was provided as the default value here. Also, our error message has now disappeared. That's because we have some valid input. As soon as I remove this valid input, though, and then blur the field, you can see that we get a message saying that the field is required. We'll learn more about how to write validation in a later lesson. But for now, just notice that we do have a required rule defined over here in our validation prompt. That's pretty cool and pretty straightforward. What's really great is that all these single line prompts are producing a number of different pieces of markup that you'd normally have to write yourself. Let's take a look in the DevTools and see what's actually being generated under the hood. For our username field here, we have a wrapper div surrounding the whole thing. We also have a label. We have an intersection here, which wraps everything that's a part of the actual input. We have markup for our help message, as well as markup for the validation message. Notice each of these have classes that are prepended with the word FormKit and then a dash. In the FormKit framework, these are all known as sections of your input. You can target these different sections based on their respective class and then style them however you'd like. Or you could even customize this class name to match up with the design system of your choice. To customize the class, you can add the section that you want to target. Let's do inner, and then provide the keyword class. Then whatever value I add here will be added to that section. Nice. You can also customize the markup of each section with slots. For instance, maybe you'd like the help text to display as a tooltip instead of underneath the input. That might look something like this. First, we'll add a closing tag. Then we'll use the template tag in order to target a particular slot. The slot that we'd like to target is called label. And it receives access to the context, which gives us more information about that particular input. Now I'll go ahead and spit out the label that is already displaying. Then we'll add a question mark. You can think of this as our tooltip icon, but we're not really going to get things working for a tooltip right now. This is just kind of an example of how you can use the slot. Then finally, I'll create a span and print out the help text within it. Once I hit save, if I come over here to the browser and refresh the page, sure enough, we now have the help text up here along with the username. Of course, it's not working like a real tooltip. Like I mentioned, we aren't actually making that functionality yet, but I think you get the idea. Now, we still get the help text underneath the input as well, but we can easily take care of that by targeting the help slot and then just rendering nothing in it. Awesome. In this lesson, you saw how a single FormKit component can power all sorts of different inputs, all with a nice clean interface. But even with this simple interface, we have the power to customize FormKit exactly to our needs. Based on these sections and the section classes, the ability to customize those section classes and even customize the markup per section with slots. All right, so I've done a little bit of coding between our lessons. You'll notice over here on the right-hand side that I've added a utils directory, and inside that there is an index.ts file. Here I've defined a wait function, and all this function really does is return a new promise, which resolves after a certain number of milliseconds. This was just a nice way for me to wait a certain amount of time using the async await syntax as opposed to set timeout with a callback function. Right. Also over here in app.vue, I've added the markup for a login form. If you'd like to get all this exact code that I've added between lessons, I've left a link in the description below to the commit for this. So feel free to grab that, copy it, and paste it into your own project. Now, you'll notice here that in order to create a form in FormKit, we use the exact same component that we use for the inputs. That is the FormKit component. But now we're giving it the type of form. Okay, that's pretty cool. Most of the time, we aren't going to be working with inputs without the context of a form. In other words, we're typically going to put inputs inside of a form. So the question is, what does FormKit offer us? What is FormKit doing for us over and above a regular form element? Let's say that this form is being used for editing an existing resource, and it already has some initial values. So we could come up here and create a reactive reference that is an object that contains those initial values. The keys in this object will need to line up with the names on the inputs. So I could have a username, and we'll just give it the default of, we'll say my Twitter handle, Daniel Kelly IO. And then for the password, we'll just leave that blank to begin with. All right. Now, in order to provide this to the form, we use the value prop. Then after I hit save, over on the left-hand side, you can see my name has been provided to the username field, and the password field is still blank. Perfect. Handling data this way keeps us from having to bind every single input within the form to a different piece of reactive data. Instead, we define all of our form data at once and then only have to bind it once, which is pretty nice. Now let's take a look at how we might handle the submission of the form. As you'd expect, I can do @submit here and then provide it a handler function. Notice though that I don't have to add the .prevent that you typically have to do on native forms. FormKit already knows that you're going to handle this via JavaScript and that you want to prevent the default behavior, so you can just leave that off. Now, if you did want to submit your form with a complete page refresh, like a typical browser form does, you could just leave this @submit off altogether, and it will do just that. Let's take a look now at what the submit handler will receive. When you're working with a native form element, I would expect the argument here to be a event. However, when you're working with a FormKit form, you actually just get direct access to the data. Let's just console log that so you can see what I'm talking about. All right. So I've got my handle submit defined here. It is being called on submit form. Let's add a password in here. I'll just say hello. And when I hit submit and take a look at things in the console, we should see our form data there. Let me clear that out because I was playing with this a little bit before the video, and I'll submit one more time to make it easier to see. All right, yeah. There's our plain and simple data. It's just an object we could do data.password and get the submitted password, and likewise with username. Now, when working with FormKit forms, they suggest in the documentation that this is always how you handle your data. You get it from the argument of the submit handler, and you don't provide vModel for the form data itself. That can work, but there might be some unexpected issues with it. So prefer to get the data from the submit handler's argument. Since we're submitting a form with JavaScript, it's common that you're going to use an AJAX request in order to post the data to a server. And while that's going on, it's really good practice to let the user know that the form is submitting. In other words, show them some kind of loading indicator and don't allow them to continue submitting while the original submission is still processing. Let's see how FormKit helps us out here by simulating an AJAX request with our wait function. So here we'll just wait for, let's say, 3 seconds. And then only after those 3 seconds, console log our data. So wait would be like sending the AJAX request to the server and then it taking 3 seconds to respond. Now I need to await, wait, and since we are using await in here, we need to change this to an async function. Great. By the way, notice that I didn't have to import wait. That's because I'm using Nuxt.js 3, and because we have this defined inside of the utils directory, it's automatically imported for us, which is pretty cool. Now, over in the browser, let's try submitting our form once more. This time, we get a loading indicator out of the box for us, and as soon as the 3 seconds is over, we get the submit button back. Also notice that the button was gray during that time. That's because it was disabled, meaning the user couldn't resubmit the form while the form submission was in progress. And we get all this for free just by using the FormKit component. In the next lesson, let's take a look at how we can customize this FormKit form by providing some props. In order to have a little more control of our form, FormKit exposes several different props that we can use to customize it. One of these props is called submit behavior. If we set submit behavior to live, this means that we can still edit the form inputs while form submission is in progress. By default, they are disabled just like the submit button is while the form is being submitted. You've also probably noticed that we don't have a button within our form, and yet one displays on the page here. That's because out of the box, the FormKit forms automatically generate a button. If we wanted to customize the label on the button, we could provide the submit label prop. Yeah, that works great. Or you can set the actions prop to false. This will enable you to handle the button for yourself. But just be aware that if you do end up going this route, you would end up handling the loading state by yourself. Or if you still want control over the actual markup of the button, just like with our fields, we can use a slot for the button as well. We'll want to target the default slot for the form, and from the context, we'll destructure the state. Then we can take our button, bring it up into the slot, and we'll say it's disabled if state.loading. And whoops, we'll also need to pass in, of course, all the other elements here into that default slot. Also, let's print out login ... whenever we're loading, and otherwise just print out login. Awesome. Now when I submit the form, we do get the proper state while things are processing, and then once it's done after 3 seconds, it reverts back to the original. The point is, FormKit is really doing a lot for us here when it comes to making nice forms. But we can also override all the smart defaults in a very intuitive way.